Wisconsin and specifically Milwaukee have a history of racial inequality and oppression. Some examples of that are redlining, income inequality, the demolition of Black neighborhoods and businesses. So how have the institutional structures created and the events of our past led to what's happening right now?
I will also add that we have a long history of injustice. We also have a long history of activism that got us through those injustices, and I think that this is one of those watershed moments. And it wasn't, I don't want people to get confused. Like, it wasn't just the killing of George Floyd. It's so many other things that got us to where we are. And for I've been talking about this stuff for over a decade. This is the reason why I ran for office in the first place, to address those systemic barriers, systemic issues that we face, be it access to healthcare, be it poor environmental conditions, income inequality, mass incarceration. The list goes on and on and on. But I always want to remind people too that there is no one politician, no one elected official that can get it done on their own, and it takes a movement of people to combat such extreme injustice. And my problem is that there are so many people who are comfortable, and it's people's comfort that got us to this place. People who've been in office forever and just kind of ignore the very real issues. And you can take the income out of it, just inequality in general, inequity in general. And at times, it would be easy for elected officials to just ignore the communities because they say, well, they don't vote anyway, so I don't have to worry about them. And that is the absolute wrong way to go about things. Any problem that you continue to ignore is only going to get worse. And that's, like I said, that's what we're seeing right now. I also compared it to internal bleeding. Like, you don't see it on the surface, but if you leave it untreated, it can be deadly. And I think it is just due to so much irresponsibility in leadership, and that's not just elected leadership; it's business leadership, it's nonprofit leadership. There are so many parties who've been accessories to these crimes against humanity, if you want to put it that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that kind of leads us right into the next question, which is, how are race and other forms of oppression used as political tools?
Well, the thing is, some people benefit off of
Mm-hmm.
racial injustice, a la our president. We have a president who ran a campaign that was based off stoking racial tensions and fears, and coupled them with actual legitimate concerns that people had. But the way that he addressed them was in the most vile way that any person ever could address those issues. And so, yeah, there's a lot that goes at play there. But there also, as there are, elected officials, people running for office who choose to ignore these issues, there are people who are comfortably in communities that think that this doesn't impact them. Why should they care? And it is that it is that frame of mind that also has us where we are. People assume that they exist on some island, or they can isolate themselves from the rest of society and not be bothered or feel the need to concern themselves with the issues of other people. But one, that's destructive. Two, it's untrue.
Mm-hmm.
Three, it is just selfish.
Yeah, I would agree 100% with that.
Mhm.
In Wisconsin, African Americans are incarcerated at more than 10 times the rate of whites, which is the second highest rate of Black-white incarceration disparity in the country. In your opinion, what do you think has led to this in our state?
Yep, it's been unfair sentencing laws. That's a huge piece of it. It has been a lack of investment in mental health treatment. It has been the over criminalization for activity that is seen as just casual
Mm-hmm.
in parts of the state and within certain communities. You can even use the powder cocaine to crack cocaine sentencing disparity as an example. And folks were put in positions where, I think about why people moved to Milwaukee in the first place. We had the Great Migration. People came to Milwaukee from the South. My grandfather was a part of that. He came from Louisiana. My grandmother was from Mississippi. and they moved here for the opportunities. My granddad worked at A.O. Smith on an assembly line. My grandmother was my grandmother worked at an MPS in food service. And we'll use A.O. Smith as the example because when they left a huge void. Not only did the jobs leave, all the opportunity it left with it, the wealth that was being created in Black communities where people were able to have gainful employment, retire comfortably, and have time and money for leisure activity. And once that was gone, there was nothing there to replace it. People were left with very few options. And you couple that with with the war on drugs and even the existence of drugs where people turn to self-medicate, and it created this. It was cataclysmic. It created it was the most imperfect storm that ravaged neighborhoods all across the country, and Milwaukee was particularly subject to that because there wasn't a plan for the people who had been left behind.
Yeah. So with all of that in mind, how do you think that Wisconsin can take on a leadership role in proposing and trying less costly measures that could improve our criminal justice system and correction system, as well as promote public safety? Like, what do you think what would put Wisconsin in a position to be a leader in that way?
Yeah, thank you for saying less costly, because that brings up the point of the fact that the path that we're on is the most costly route.
Yeah.
The fact that it costs over $30,000 to incarcerate an individual in our state prison system, given the fact that we spend over $1 billion on incarceration, and it is the years, it is the decades that got us to this place that makes it no easy task to dismantle. Because people, the money that at the turn of the century we started spending more money on incarceration than we did on the UW system, and that's just a priorities mismatch. And there's all sorts of ways that you can look at that. I mean, the less money you spend on the prison system, the more money you have for preventative measures like education, like making sure that our K-12 system is fully supported, not just with smaller classroom sizes, not just with the best teachers in the world, but also the supports that our students need. Because the fact is, a lot of our children are coming from some very difficult or live in some very difficult situations, and they don't always have their mental health needs addressed. They don't have the support that they need that addresses the trauma that they experience. And when that's ignored, just like everything else, at a micro level, at a smaller level than the mass events that we're seeing, you see this played out in lower education, lower education attainment, and more problematic behavior and other issues that end up putting them on a path to prison. And it's the worst part is that so much of this, it was preventable. Like, the data was there, the studies were there. That's we don't need any more data. We don't need any more studies. We know what we need to do. We just need to employ the practices. But it takes people willing to even address that it's an issue. And I couldn't be more frustrated and fed up with the leadership in our state legislature, because no matter what is brought up, they ignore it because it doesn't exist in their communities. Although everybody feels this impact statewide in one way or another. If we're busy spending all our money on prisons, then that's less money for schools. If we're spending all this money on prisons, that means it's less money to support, we'll even say, our rural communities that have been devastated by the closure of so many family farms in Wisconsin. And we could be supporting so many people in so many ways if only the leadership existed in the state legislature to help us pass a fair, equitable, and just budget. But they have shown a complete unwillingness to do that. And I always like to remind people to it's in a time like this, it's fair to point fingers at politicians. I just want people to understand, who the finger should be pointed at. Like, I just want people to point the fingers in the right direction. I want people to understand where the responsibility lies. And there are that whole comfort piece that I talked about earlier. There are too many politicians who are just comfortable, who can get by without even addressing everything that's going on right now around the country. There are still people who can get by maybe putting out one statement and then just going about the rest of their day and not worrying about this. There are still people in elected office in all parties who like have this comfortability, and they'll even acknowledge as much. And it's like, if this is the point where you're finally willing to step up and confront your own comfortability and racism, that's a problem. You shouldn't even sought public office if you had a comfortability in racism and racist practices and racial injustices. You should have thought about doing something else first before stepping into a position where people's lives are literally depending on you.
Yeah. We've seen across the country, like, people have been posting the city budgets in large communities, and just seeing the disparity of the money that goes to the things you were talking about: education, arts, culture, just all of these things that can really help people, and then the huge amount of money that's spent on police departments every year. And I've also seen, I think it was LA, that they're taking money out of the budget and reallocating it into those other areas. Yeah. Do you think that's realistic for Wisconsin, or what are your thoughts there?
It can be. It can be. And that's my thing. So I don't want people to get confused either, right? Like, police officers should want to reform. And one of the bigger problems is the reason why a lot of people go into law enforcement, because they want to play this role where they're this enforcer, not someone who's keeping the community safe.
Yeah.
You get a lot of people who go into it for the absolute wrong reasons. Same way you get a lot of people who go into politics for the absolute wrong reasons. But given that authority that the people in law enforcement have, the police officers have, that does not bode well for over-policed and marginalized communities, right? Like, I have personal friends who are police officers. I know people who are in it for the right reasons, but it's important for them, like, as someone, as people always say, are you going to condemn the rioters? Are you going to condemn the people who are looting? Well, are you asking the same question in police departments? Are they going to condemn the people who abuse their power, who abuse their authority, who totally walk back their oath that they swore to protect and serve? Those are all legitimate questions that have to be asked. And I think that we have to reimagine what policing looks like, or what it should be, or what that function or how that function should exist in society. And I think that it's important to build bridges, to build trust. And I share something with people in the faith community. I host a faith community call statewide that I started doing because of COVID-19, and now we've kind of transferred or transitioned a little bit, still addressing COVID-19 because it's a very real thing and it's still out there, but also acknowledging the issues that we're facing with that are right in the forefront. And people asked what they can do, and I said, well, and I posted, or I shared with them, the 8 things that police departments should be doing that Campaign Zero put out, because these are in honest, in full transparency, there are people who are like, well, this isn't enough, and like a couple people on Twitter, and I'm like, sure, but not doing nothing and not doing anything is definitely not enough. And these are very simple steps that people can take, and it requires an approach at every level: federal, state, and local, and community as well. And if people need concrete action items that they can implement now, because it is absolutely not realistic for certain communities to think that they are going to completely rid themselves of their police departments. You go to small towns, wherever, but it is very much possible for steps to be taken for us to see responsible responsible policing in the communities. I mean, and some of the things that were the 8 things that were laid out in the 8 can't wait, those are things that you would just expect
Honestly,
police
I was
departments.
like, how are these?
Most
Why
people, when they see that, it's wait,
already?
how is this not the case already?
Yeah.
So there are very simple, basic steps, and that is research and evidence based.
Hmm.
And I like to, I like for my decision making to be informed by evidence
Yeah.
and research.
Yeah, those were interesting to see. And to, I also saw the backlash on Twitter that it's not enough, but I mean, it has to start somewhere, and these are the simplest ways to do it. So,
Hmm.
um, real quick, I want to remind everyone that if you have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A button right in Zoom, or you can just chat it as well. We do have a question in there that I'm going to ask from Christina. She says, appreciate the history of Milwaukee, but what are your thoughts on what we all need to be doing to ensure the conversation doesn't stop with politicians, business owners, residents of the community? The voices are loud and many want to help make change in Milwaukee right now.
That's a good question, and I think that a lot of this is conversations that people should have been having for a long time, amongst your friends or even within yourself, or even internally. I think that for so long, we can just go back to the issue of comfort, and I talked about on Twitter. I mentioned that a lot of people haven't been willing to confront the racism that may exist within their own family
Hmm.
or within their own household. And before you run around holding other people accountable, or before you run around breaking glass in the streets, you should break that glass at the dinner table, and
Hmm.
have those conversations with people. And think about what your world looks like, and how you can be better, in general. And that doesn't, I'm not even expecting everybody just to show up at a march holding a sign and going to public hearings, but there's so many small steps that people can take. And showing up to City Hall is one thing, because there are fire and police commission meetings. These are public meetings that folks can
Hmm.
attend. When confirmation hearings are up, it's important to show up. Voting, obviously, yeah, you should vote. That's paramount. I mean, that's step one. But like, there are so many other factors that are influenced by the people you vote for, and too often these decisions get made because nobody they don't hear from anybody in opposition to some very terrible policies or devastating appointments that get made.
Yeah. And speaking of the people that are put into those positions, what are some tactical things that can be done on a policy level across the state to ensure that everything that's led up to what's happening now and this unrest just don't continue to happen?
We got to lead with equity. You got to lead with equity. You got to lead with sustainability. I mean, since I took my oath of office as lieutenant governor, those are the two things that I continue to talk about: equity and sustainability. People have to have opportunity wherever they live, and if the opportunity doesn't exist, we have to create opportunity. And gone are the days where people can just think about themselves, and that's why I talk about business leaders, nonprofit leaders, because I look and I see the email where it's like, we have these business execs who step up and talk about the issue of racial injustice. Like, well, I mean, I'm frustrated that it took this long, because this isn't anything new.
Mm-mm.
This didn't happen over the last couple weeks. It's been a generations long problem, and I guess I'm happy that people are willing to finally accept what's going on, but it shouldn't have happened because people feared what damage their business may have sustained,
Yep.
or these brands every brand is racing to put something out on social media about their commitment to racial justice. And it's like, and like I said, it's more about Black dollars than it is about Black lives.
Yep.
But whatever is, if that kind of conversation, whether it's genuine or not, if it makes somebody else think about race in a way that they consider something other than their own personal lives, then fine. It's about, I'm more about the end result. But I think that this is something that has waited for just too long.
Yeah. We have another good tactical question from the audience here. What steps would need to be taken to reallocate dollars from the police budget into other areas? Can the governor invoke executive power on certain policy decisions, and is he willing to go that far?
Well, that's a local control issue.
Okay.
And I will say that city budget hearings are public meetings,
Hmm.
and that you can show up to a budget meeting. You can submit your requests online via phone, email, but it's important to be there, to look people out in the eye and ask those questions. Why is X amount of money being spent here, but not here? And I think there are also preventative things that we can do too. I know that the Office of Violence Prevention has a plan, or has a number of plans and ideas that they have been pushing forward, having violence disruptors or interrupters, people who actually live in communities, people who have relationships in neighborhoods and are trusted. And that goes to another point too, which was one of the worst things, is when the last governor got rid of the residency requirement for police officers. If you're a police officer, you should live in the city
Hmm.
that you are sworn to protect and serve, point blank. And that goes for firefighters as well. Anybody who, if you are truly committed to the community you serve, the least you can do is live in that community.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You had mentioned trust in your statement there. We have a question that came through in the chat, kind of if we can shift gears a little bit to the protests that are happening in Milwaukee and across the state. How do we get the police not to act like the public is the enemy? They employ such overkill with riot gear, Humvees, tear gas, rubber bullets, even against the press. We've been seeing young peaceful protesters with their hands up or on their knees I mean, we see the videos. How can they kind of turn this around? And
That goes back to the culture issue, and that
yeah,
goes back to the people who hire them have to hold them accountable. You see, again, that is perfect. You see people who weren't involved in any sort of chaos, members of the press who've been pelted with rubber, not even pelted, that's loosely putting it. The rubber
yeah,
bullets are you more than getting pelted. And there has to be an end to that. Police, they have to stop firing rubber bullets and tear gas on innocent or on peaceful protesters. That is not the way to go about that. It's not going to bring about the resolve. The response to people protesting brutality should not be brutality.
hmm,
That is the most ridiculous, vicious cycle. And when it goes to that whole trust conversation, trust involves listening. Hear people out, listen to what they say. And, you see pictures of officers kneeling. That's cool. But if an officer is going to kneel with protesters, then they turn around and another police officer shoots them with a rubber bullet, that's problematic. And so I have called for, them to stop firing rubber bullets, excessive use of force on protesters, because on peaceful protesters, because that could not be more counterproductive. And when I talked about the people who hire them, the mayor, the police chief, they have to respond to that. The sheriff, who is an elected official, they have to respond to that. And that's where accountability comes into play. If the people that you have the opportunity to employ or terminate their employment, if they are acting in a way that needlessly puts lives at risk, then there should be there has to be a reckoning there. And you can compare it to so many other things, like if a doctor does something wrong, they could be sued for malpractice, they
hmm,
could be jailed. And I understand completely that police work is not easy, but that's why we need serious people to be involved in that work.
yeah,
We need people who are actually committed, and people who are going to take that job seriously, understanding the gravity, understanding what that actually means. Those are the people who should be employed in police work. Those who are not going to needlessly put folks at risk. And again, that goes back to the culture conversation, because there are a lot of people who have other grievances in life and figure that being an officer is the best way that they can be able to air those grievances. But that is more than an accident waiting to happen. That is catastrophe waiting to happen.
Mm-hmm. And it just seems like there's been a lot of times where we've seen this happen forever, and most of the time there are no consequences for these types of actions. So,
yeah, people engage in this behavior with impunity.
mm-hmm.
And that's another part of the problem, because you see people get away with it, you figure, oh, I can get away with it too, and then the cycle continues.
Yeah, it just never stops. It's very sad to see. All right, another question kind of about how people are getting involved. Mark says, I am one for also voting with my wallet. Does that currently undermine helping support the economies? Any suggestions on how to do this better?
Yes, voting with your dollars, right? There are a lot of I'm a huge proponent, shop local, spend your money with the people who keep our communities going, the people who, their values, what they represent, and they actually care about you is another thing about that too. Too often we spend money with people who just don't care about us, or people who spend money who use the money that you give them and they use it on politics that are counter to progress. Like people were looking at, CEO of Wendy's, CEO of Chick-fil-A, all these places that mass produce food that's not even good for you. That's another conversation. That's an entirely different conversation. But they spend that money on people who who propose some really dangerous policy for our country and are putting us in the wrong direction. And so voting with your dollars is spending money locally. That's my version. That's my idea of voting with your dollars. Not to say that there aren't some problematic local people, like the dude that owns what was that Blue Ribbon Pub out in Brookfield.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So there are true enough, but
so basically do your research and put your money into people you believe
research. And the thing about local businesses too, the thing about local businesses is it's not difficult to talk to the owner.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
I don't imagine I ever talked to the CEO of McDonald's or Walmart or Jeff Bezos. Actually, funny thing is I bought like a $1 of stock in Amazon just so I could vote against Jeff Bezos.
Wow. You're our hero.
That vote holds very little weight, but it mattered.
You did it.
I did it.
That's what matters.
And because that's another conversation too, because we can go back to inequality issues in this pandemic. Billionaire wealth increased about $500 billion, over $400 billion is the amount of wealth that was generated for the richest people among us, while we have historic unemployment, historic joblessness right now. People are food insecure. People aren't getting their unemployment claims processed because there's a backlog in the system, because so many people are trying to get their benefits. And that wealth is just going to continue to be concentrated, and it's not going to come back. That is $500 billion that's not going to come back to the general public. That's not going to come back to the American people. We're not going to see that again. That's wealth that is completely taken away from the economy.
Yeah. And kind of going a little into the COVID situation and assistance programs for people that are unemployed or are in a tough spot. Someone has a question. Are you aware of anything that might be slowing the rollout of the RAP rent assistance program? They're a co-signer on a lease for a family member and also responsible for their own monthly payments. A lot of people are talking about rent strike, but that's not really a good solution for diffusing tension or calming violence.
Yep. The RAP program, it should be, I thought it was rolled out already, but it should be rolled out Monday, if not now. And the Social Development Commission, I was actually on the phone with the executive director of the Social Development Commission yesterday, and he told me how his staff was getting trained up and ready to go. So I don't have the contact on hand, but I can get that, or it's just sdc.org, I believe, or more. Just if you Google SDC, Social Development Commission Milwaukee, Google it, it'll take you to the website. There'll be a phone number or contact information there for you to get information. That's who's going to be handling the RAP program.
Awesome, thank you. I'm just going to kind of switch over. We have a lot of Q&A coming in, so if that's okay with you, I'm just kind of run down questions. So they're going to kind of be all over the place, but Katie asks, how do you feel? I'm curious as to how your emotions have changed over the course of this recent movement. Are you tired, motivated, encouraged?
Yes.
All of the above.
All the above. I would say tired only because like this isn't a new thing, right? This is what we've been dealing with forever. This is what we've been talking about forever. And the thing though is this one doesn't necessarily feel repetitive. It definitely feels different. And I will say encouraged by the people who seem to get it now. I think about some of the interviews I've done recently on different radio shows, and these are like top 40 radio shows who don't ever have to. 99.1 The Mix and 103.7. It's like these are issues that they would be able to be just fine without ever talking about this, right? And they wanted to have that conversation. And these are people who, through the discussions, like, even before the discussion, like they understood, like they wanted to talk about it. And, folks are just tired. People are tired of hearing about it. People are tired of reading about it, and they want something different. They want things to change. So I am encouraged by that. And like I said, the generational diversity, the ethnic diversity that we see at these peaceful protests. And, I feel like the things that we've been pushing for forever, we are slowly building the coalition that's gonna get it done. And I also see an opportunity for us to, engage in so much more. And I was, we're not gonna come out of the pandemic the way that we went in. Yeah, that was what I got from this sermon I listened to on Sunday. We're not gonna come out of the pandemic the way that we went in. True enough, and we're definitely not gonna come out of this uprising the way that we went into COVID. And while we're here, I think there's the opportunity for us to take a deep examination of what reality looks like for people across the state and across this country, and how do we plan a better future, one that gets us so far away from where we are now, so that we never have to do this again.
Yeah, I would echo that sentiment. It just seems like it's such a moment of opportunity for real change, and seems like this is the way that we're going to get it. So we'll go through a couple more questions and then we'll kind of wrap it up.
Okay.
What are some impactful things that white people can do to support the Black community while understanding that racism and social inequality is not new for people of color?
Yep, the best thing is listen. Listen and think about the interactions that you have in your personal life. And again, it goes back to the conversation that you're also having with people that don't get it. There are still far too many people that don't get it, and there are conversations that you can have that aren't even possible for people of color to have. Whether it's in your boardroom, whether it's in the management at your company, or wherever you are, that in those spaces, especially that people of color don't exist, those spaces that lack diversity, ask yourself, why isn't it here, and how can we make this better? And don't be afraid to push. Like, use that, like Akila said, we need that let me speak to the manager energy.
Yep.
This is you got the energy to, she said, act like you're on the phone with Apple Care and they told you got to wait another 30 minutes. Treat it like that moment. The rage that you feel when Apple Care tells you got to wait for 30 minutes. The rage that you feel when you can't get a customer support number. Use that same energy in this moment.
Yeah. I mean, really, honestly, people that have any kind of position of privilege just need to leverage that to help people that are less fortunate, and really can be that easy. And also, it's on yourself to educate yourselves as a white person. I mean, the resources
Hmm.
are there. Just there's lists of books that have been put out that I've seen that are hundreds long, basically, of just do some educate yourself so you don't need to ask how you can help.
Hmm.
Basically, it's
Like
my
be, you know, and that's the thing. It's like being intentional. And I keep repeating this too, where it's like, you know, I think about where I stand on immigration issues and my advocacy, because that's important to me. Although I don't come from an immigrant family, you know, I'm not an immigrant. Uh, that's an important issue. I wouldn't know what I know about the issue of immigration if I didn't just spend time with immigrant communities and listen to what their concerns were.
Mhm.
And same with any other issue that I don't directly identify with. It could be LGBTQ issues, right? I'm not a member of the community, but it's important for me to listen and learn what those concerns are, because there's so much commonality in struggle, and understanding what challenges they face, understanding what challenges we all face. It makes us better. It just makes us better people.
Yeah. Okay, we'll kind of wrap it up. There's a couple questions in here about being worried that people are going to start losing their energy. I mean, I think we're on day 7 of these protests across the country and in our own cities. Are there groups mobilizing that you know of or already mobilized in Milwaukee to be a part of community? And also, how can people in business and in all sectors of the society stay on message if the energy starts to die down?
There is definitely an opportunity for energy to dissipate. I don't know that that's the case, right? That's not what I feel right now.
Mhm.
But I do feel like what's important, though, to prevent that from happening is channeling that energy into outlets. And I can go back to the thing about everybody doing something. Everybody can't do the same thing. Everybody shouldn't do the same thing. Everybody has the capacity. People have the capacity, you know, be it their personal or professional lives, to be impactful in different ways. And I think that the energy that's there, while, you know, even if the protests die down, there's still other ways that protests can happen, because you know you carry those ideas, you carry those principles, you carry that energy, like what was said earlier, voting with your dollars,
Mhm.
voting in general, showing up to these committee hearings. And I think that even if, you know, thousands of people aren't showing up in the street, uh, you know, dozens of people here and there doing their thing that they can do in their respective lives to carry on that energy is still very much worthwhile.
Yeah, definitely agree. So how would you want to leave? What message do you want to leave for everybody watching here in this
Yeah,
time of uncertainty?
I can just go back and just repeat that we can literally, you know, changing the world is not hyperbolic
Hmm.
right now. It's not some far off idea, because the world has to change.
Yeah.
The world has to respond. The world has to uh, be not just, you know, rotating on an axis, but rotating as a response to the needs of society. And the needs of society aren't always met, and that creates a backlog. And we are seeing we're seeing the effects of things being bottlenecked. And as long as over injustice is allowed to overflow, you know, people are going to drown. But we can clean up that mess, and we can create that society that is open, inclusive, welcoming, inviting to everybody. And we can create opportunity for everybody. And be it systems of governing, which do include law enforcement, we can radically reimagine what that looks like. And
Hmm.
that was the case even with COVID, like thinking about what the world would look like, what a post COVID world would look like. But now that there are even more issues that are being brought to the forefront, we can imagine not what a post racial society looks like, but what a post racial injustice society looks like.
Yep. Well, thank you so much for doing this with us today. I know you're probably incredibly busy, so we really appreciate you sharing your thoughts and answering questions from our audience.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
No problem. We always love to hang out with you.
Yay.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have fun. Go out, support however you can, and we'll see you on the Cloud Cafe.
All right.